Welcome to Metaconscious Leaders, where today we share the second of two linked podcasts in which Shawne Mitchell is talking about her book, Transcendental Leadership, in more detail. Last week, we focused on the portals of being a transcendental leader, and this week we focus on the traits of transcendental leaders, how these are reflected across religious and spiritual traditions, and how we can begin to embody them in our own leadership practice. So welcome, Shawne. Thank you for joining us again, and welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you, Greg. Enjoy being here and having these conversations with you. And it's very kind of you to highlight. It took a lot of soul to write the book.
Yeah, well, it's a very special book. Show it up again here. It's a very special book. Read it a couple of years ago. I've read it a couple of times now. But whenever I go back into it, it's so beautifully written, and it contains so many gems. So whatever walk of life, whatever type of leader you are, there is lots of wisdom to be gleaned from dipping into it and reading it. And it's also very practical as well. That's another thing that I like about it. It's not just esoteric. It's actually very practical. And so we can apply it in day-to-day leadership and business activities. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Well, thank you. And I have to give a shout out to I interviewed 20 plus individuals who I feel are exemplary, conscious, spiritual, transcendental leaders. And so there's lots of input and quotes and stories and anecdotes that come from them who are, people on the ground, and they're not necessarily the well-known, famous kinds of leaders, but they're people who are, like I said, feet on the ground and doing the work.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And we've had already one of them as a guest on Metaconscious Leaders, Peter Mattis. He makes a contribution to your book, and a couple of others hopefully will be coming along in the future as well. So it's not essential that listeners will have seen last week's episode in order to get full value from this one. But just in case there are some who haven't yet seen last week's episode, could we just start with a reminder and a refresher, a bit of a recap perhaps, on the meaning of transcendence? Because we're going to be talking about it quite a bit. So can we just start with a refresher on what is transcendence?
Well, in my mind, and as I shared with you last time as well, I do have a tendency to make up things as I go along in terms of what I hope might be a visionary narrative. And it might not be what's considered, I might be a little woo-woo when I speak it. And then maybe 2, 3 years, 5 years down the road, it's become a little more the nomenclature of the day. But in terms of transcendence, again, we talked about the definition of to transcend and the notion of above. But at the same time, to transcend, in my opinion, is to go deeper as well, and transcending perhaps what we consider to be our normal notions of what we consider our reality to be, and to transcend into higher states of consciousness. And oftentimes, as many of us know who have been in this kind of work, to transcend and increase our awareness of consciousness and frequency and so forth, there's an amount of inner, I don't want to say descend, but that inner deeper going within work that at a certain point, and we're very familiar with mystics and sages and saints and gurus and great masters who have had days and days and days of silence and deep reflection or introspection and meditation, that in those deeper states, they access those states of transcendence. So when I say transcendental leadership, I'm looking at taking conscious leadership, spiritual, transformational, transpersonal elements, and accessing states of transcendence, meaning, in my opinion, aligning with universal wisdom. And we can translate, depending on the individual, is that God consciousness, is that the Atman, is that Brahman, is that the cosmos? Is that different for everyone? But can we align and connect with universal states of greater wisdom and incorporate and be informed in our leadership by those precepts and that relationship, by being guided by those things?
Right. Thank you. And throughout your book, you show the practical application, the practical value of that within a business context. And that's the beautiful bit. You also very beautifully go through and show how all the great religions of the world have, or how transcendence is reflected through all of those traditions. It's a key part of the teachings. And can you share that common ground and illustrate how transcendence shows up in each of them?
I did do that, and I tried very hard to take every well-known, I call it spiritual tradition, and sometimes they're called the religions of the world, and to indicate, excuse me, the perennial philosophy and the underlying common precepts and principles of those spiritual traditions, and then to take research and take whether it was something from Socrates or whether it was something from the Buddha or whether it was something from Jesus or whether it was something from Muhammad or whether it was something from the Hindu or Buddhist traditions that indicated that they actually said something about leadership and leadership aligned from a spiritual relationship with, again, God, source, universal wisdom.
And so, looking at your book here, and some of the examples of how it is expressed in those different religions. Sorry, I haven't got the right page here. Where is it now?
Well, I can maybe help a little bit here. For example, to help along here, it is known, I guess, or considered that the Buddha said, I am awake. When he was asked, the story goes, he was asked by some disciples and so forth, who are you? Are you a god? Are you a saint? Are you? And he said, I am awake. And in translation, he's talking about presence, awareness, deep wisdom. Socrates said, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, he says, to a mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders.
Very powerful.
Yeah. And Gandhi, I'm going to say one more here. Mahatma Gandhi, I should say Mohandas Gandhi, obviously a Hindu. Quote, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And that goes into that whole, love your neighbor as yourself.
And actually ties back into one of the gateways that we talked about last week as well, isn't it? Which is being in service to others and finding purpose and meaning in that, and thereby transcendence beyond the perception of self.
One of the ones, I don't know if you're familiar with the incredible scholar, author, Karen Armstrong, who's written numerous books on different spiritual religious traditions. And one of the things that she wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have this exact, and it had to do with Islam, and it had to do with Muhammad, I believe Muhammad saying something along the lines that looking into the face of any individual is looking into the face of God.
Lovely. Yeah. I'm just picking up here on a quote where you write here, Krishna teaches Arjuna, this is from the Bhagavad Gita, that leading a spiritual life does not require renunciation of work and action, but rather that we should respect the responsibilities of our daily lives while maintaining a higher consciousness. And again, I think that in various ways that's reflected in Christianity, it's reflected in other religions that and Buddhism. It's like we live in a physical realm, but it's not fundamental. So to the extent that we can be aware of that which sits behind, underneath, that which is fundamental, and play a part and play our role in this transient physical realm, then we'll find ourselves having much more fulfilling lives and happier lives. So I think, unless there are any particular ones that that stand out for you, Shawne, we can move on. But again, I would refer people back to the book because you draw them out from as I say, the main world religions that there are as well. And it's very beautifully done. So thank you for that.
I would only add one so obvious, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, we all know that one. That to me not only is on an individual basis, but when we look at that more deeply, it indicates our interconnectivity. We raise one, we raise everybody. And we've gotten so far away from these principles, basic principles of ethics, moral integrity, loving each other, helping each other, contributing to the whole. And when I say that, you and I, we're speaking the same language, but I don't know about all your listeners. But it's not just about humanity. It's about every living, and I don't even want to say creature, right? It's every living element and our planet and so on. Science tells us we're all, our whole nature of reality is this interconnected energy field of subatomic particles and energy and so on, and entanglement theory. We're completely connected. And when we give out love and compassion, not only does it come back to us, not only is it, I'm going to say, radiant in our energy field, but it raises flow, synchronicity, and greater love in our own world and in our own lives. And I just pray, I just hope and wish that the leaders of our world, the leaders of our communities, the leaders, of families that are falling apart, we just need to get back to these precepts.
And Shawne, we are all leaders indeed, aren't we? Even, the most important form of leadership is leadership of myself. And indeed, only when I'm able to do that fully, or only to the extent that I'm able to do that, am I able to lead anyone else or be a leader in any shape or form. So that interconnectedness, when we can be aware of by and being in that transcendent state, is being beyond the simple concept of self, of me and my body, and I'm here and I'm separate. Transcendence is really going beyond that and recognizing the interconnectedness and interdependence of all things, and then stepping back down into business or whatever it is that we're doing, and recognizing that everything we do has ripples, and all those ripples go out in and affect everyone, everything, our environment, the natural world. And we're just all one with that. So let's get into the traits of transcendental leaders. There are three main ones that you identify. Do you want to kick us off with those, and then we'll look at the others?
Well, those three that you and I talked about, and the three main, let's call them categories, that I've written about in the book prior to coming up with the categories, I feel that the individual who is curious and interested about the nature of reality in general, and in that curiosity, let's say, and perhaps a journey of learning, will discover that, the nature of reality is somewhat of a mystery still, but at the same time, we're learning all kinds of things about what makes up what we consider to be our reality here on Earth, right? And to a certain degree, that's again, and I might be, saying this a little too much, it showcases to us our interconnectivity. And that's I'm going to say, a primary element of our nature of reality. We are not separate from our experience. We're not separate from what's around us and so forth. So that's was my umbrella, if you will, of the whole chapter on the traits of a transcendental leadership. And as you mentioned, my three categories are aspects of wisdom, aspects of awareness, and then aspects of serving the whole. And so the transcendental leader, or what I feel is that conscious, spiritually aligned leader, is interested in not only their self wisdom, but the wisdom of life and the world and the cosmos. And they're on not only their own personal journey, of course, but they want to help empower the wisdom and self growth of their employees, their children, their friends, and it's not like, I'm a teacher necessarily. They embody it. They have seminars if you're an employer. They individually and as a group with their teams, these are the kinds of things that they want to help their employees with. The other one is awareness that we talked about. And I want to say awareness slash presence, because the more present we are, the greater our awareness is. And that requires observing, that requires emotional intelligence, and those are some of the traits. It requires suspending judgment. It requires deep dialogue and deep listening to kind of like, can I listen for a minute and not interrupt what somebody is saying while I actually take in this individual and what they have to say, whether it's your child or it's your employee. And then the last one is, if we start to put all these things together, and in terms of our understanding that we're connected to the whole, we cannot not, in terms of leading a meaningful life and having purposeful work, we will serve the whole. I can't serve just the elite. I can't serve just the Monsanto in terms of shareholder supremacy. No, 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 no. We can't do that anymore. It's not going to work. It's not sustainable. We want to serve the whole, and it raises everybody and everything up. And that, when I say serve the whole, is I'm not talking again just about humanity. It's who we are in relationship to all of life, and again, our planet and the cosmos.
Yeah, yeah. And indeed, the much of the current situation, the polycrisis or the polycrises in the world at the moment, underline that point, that in order to find a solution, we have to act together. But preceding any action is being, and is having the wisdom and the awareness to recognize that interconnectedness and interdependence that we keep on referring back to. So that's actually quite a neat segue into the next bunch of traits, which we were talking earlier, and they fall into quite neatly into a few different categories. Do you want to talk about the first category of being, which really is a foundation of, we act in accordance with our being. And if we try changing our actions without changing who we are, then it's going to be a fairly short-term outcome. We're going to revert to type. And so, do you want to kick off with that one?
Sure. Thank you. And as always, I invite you to just, jump right in, Greg, because you have great insight. Well, again, I feel that our being is informed by our alignment and relationship with universal wisdom, source, God consciousness, and so on. And from that, like you said, our being will therefore inform our doing. I'm going to just reiterate a little bit that an interest in this overall understanding of the nature of reality and us being interconnected will have a lot to do with our capacity for suspending judgment, deep listening, cultivating emotional balance, and which then, helps cultivate humility, helps cultivate capacity for deep listening. And little by little, that will inform our being. And of course, gratitude, empowering others. So maybe that falls into doing. But in terms of our being, you're right. I feel that the traits that help increase our capacity for presence, deep, like I said, deep listening and emotional intelligence and so on and so forth, those are going to inform our doing. Does that help?
Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts a little bit along those lines?
Well, one of the ones that really jumps out for me, and I wouldn't have said this, by the way, a couple of years ago, all right, but it is one that really jumps out as being a key one, is the capacity for joy and the ability to be playful. And that's a trait, and neither of those are selfish acts. Joy and playfulness is a collective thing. It's something you do with others, and there isn't there aren't issues of supremacy in there or power in there. They are harmonious. They're fun. they're engaging, they're collective, they're all sorts of adjectives which are not coming to my attention at the moment. But that's one that strikes me. Gratitude, I completely agree with you. It's so important because gratitude is a state, isn't it? Gratitude is a state of, or can be a state of being. When we can look at gratitude as being, oh, I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm not, no, forget that. That is not, that's very selective gratitude, and it's quite hard work. There is a state where it's a it is a state of gratitude. Gratitude is not a doing, it's a being. So when we're in a state of gratitude, and this is something that's very useful to practice, I believe, when we're in a state of gratitude, we are grateful for everything. We are grateful for life. We're grateful for breath. We're grateful for the moment. And in that state, we see possibility. We see opportunity. Synchronicities arise and we go, wow, and it's, hey, and what previously would have been a selective, I'm grateful for this, but not for that, we suddenly find they're connected. And in that connection, we find opportunity.
Yeah, I love that because that brings to mind I was with some friends the other day and they were bemoaning some of the things going on in the United States. In this particular case, it had to do with research and science in terms of medical. And one of the things that can come up out of that, I find lately for me, is a reframing. And for me, the reframing was we're not ever going to stop the curiosity of the individuals in medical science and what could happen out of what we consider to be this debacle of reduced funding are more creative research, more interest in the plant world in terms of medicine, just to name one potential area. But that, and then there's music theory and energy and Reiki. And so I was reframing the bemoaning of in this particular case, because I really do get a kick out of reframing things like, well, wait a minute, everything's falling apart and going to, wearing a handbasket. But if we reframe some of these things, there's going to be all kinds of
Exactly.
innovation
Yep.
will, I believe, bubble to the surface. And one other thing I want to say about gratitude, and this is a shout out to Dr. Joan Borisenko, who's a very well-known speaker, author, and so forth here in the United States. She was sharing one time about a practice that she has is that every single day she thinks of something to be grateful for. And the trick is it has to be different every day. So you get into the third month and you're in mindfulness. You're sort of present the day long to look for and be aware and open for something to be grateful for that you haven't noticed, mentioned, or thought of before. And I just loved that practice. I thought that was very insightful and creative.
Yeah, yeah. And that reminds me of another practice, which is actually to notice those things which I'm not grateful for and investigate.
Oh, well said.
And even go a little bit further and think, well, in what way might I be grateful? In what way could I be grateful? In what way could this be serving me?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a number of other ones which come to mind.
Fights us to look at our shadow side, right? And that's a whole other conversation.
Exactly. There are some rich pickings here. Another one in the being category that I love is Transcendental Leaders. I acknowledge a force at work throughout the cosmos. It's like an acknowledgement that I'm not alone. There is, do you know what? I can look at my life in one of two ways. Either it's a string of failures, because every plan that I've ever set and written down and targets, it hasn't happened. Something else has happened. So in my mind, my left brain, if you like, is saying all these plans, no, fail, 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 fail. I can look at my life in it's probably more the right brain, and look at actually what happened, as opposed to what I planned to happen, actually what happened. And it's one that's been exquisitely orchestrated. It's like, well, that wasn't me because I was planning something different. So what was that about? Was that a force at work a secret hand that is at work throughout the cosmos, because I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it myself. It's far too complicated to do it myself. There are too many variables to be controlled for me to have brought it about, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that one. I think that that's really primary. And I know for myself that things have happened in my life. I call it grace falling out of the sky because I could not in 100 years have strategized. I think of the Gita's a little bit like this too, but you have a goal, and I liken it maybe to sailing. You're this way, that way, this you're blown off course. You've got to tack with prevailing.
Well, you need to, you can't go in a straight line, can you? You need to go this way and that way and this way and that way in order to get to the.
That's right. And so there's a certain paradox in that surrender, because source, grace, whatever, has brought things to me that were way better, way cooler, way more fun, way more interesting, way more of a great adventure than I could ever have thought up on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even when I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's gonna hit the fan," I land on my feet, and I forget to surrender and trust in that way too often, because I
Yeah.
truly believe you're right, that there are greater forces at work here, that I like to think that the transcendental leader, more often than not, can trust that.
Yeah. You mentioned their paradox. And just as an aside, I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Ian McGilchrist. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's written a couple of fabulous books, The Mastering His Emissary and The Matter with Things. And he was saying that he was talking to a Chinese lady, and she was saying they don't have the word paradox in China,
Oh.
in Chinese. And paradox is essentially things that are kind of opposites. They're not related. They're paradoxical. They're contradictory. But in China, they don't have the word because they see it as one.
Mm,
Yeah, they see it as a whole. There's a this and a that. There's no contradiction there. There's no paradox. It's like they see it as one,
I love that.
which is says a lot about the way the Western mind, and I think the Western philosophy, and I think the way that we even right the way through to the way the Western civilization, in inverted commas, call it that, has grown, and it shows in its beliefs, structures, laws, actions, behaviors, and so forth. So those are some of the ones on being, and of course, as we be, so do we think. So we've got things of traits of thinking of leaders, purpose, Shawne.
I'm looking at some of these too. We've talked about being purpose driven to a certain degree, and the
Yep.
capacity to suspend certainty and judgment. And I think that that takes a certain amount of thinking, in the sense that we have a capability to take a pause. And that takes a moment of not thinking to thinking and not, not thinking at the same time, to not interrupt, but to kind of like reflect. And reflection slash thinking. We don't appreciate solitude and silence. We think that we're not thinking. But sometimes, and everybody knows the stories of great minds like, Albert Einstein and so forth, who would, take naps and walks in the woods and so forth to stop thinking, in a sense, so some new understanding could bubble to the surface. So, and clearly, the transcendental leader needs to be responsible. These are some of those, I call them the hard skills. They need to know strategic thinking. They need to know budgeting. They need to be accountable. They need to be responsible. And those things require the thinking skills. One of the things in our world right now is we're not teaching our children critical thinking, and we're just shoving dreadful information that, as at a young mind, they're just, oh, it's this, or oh, it's that, and we're not teaching the critical skills of critical thinking skills. So I'm that.
And along with that critical thinking is that wonderful quality which we don't have enough of often, is which curiosity, which
Right.
children have in abundance. But a lot of the educational system, certainly in the West, is one that dumbs down curiosity and says, no, this is it. We know what it's about. Here's a book, learn it. Now, look, I think in some places it's breaking down, but it's still the prevalent drift of the cultural structure that we live in, I believe.
Well, you know how some schools, and I'm going to say, well, I shouldn't say elementary, but you know how we've discouraged what is called daydreaming. And have to give a shout out to Jonathan Schooler at the University of Santa Barbara, but he has a lab, and Dr. Schooler, and he has a lab that has where they study mind wandering, they call it, and where it's encouraged.
Okay.
I love that. Instead of discouraging daydreaming, it's like, yeah, let's do some mind wandering.
And are there any outcomes that arise out of that? Any discoveries they've come upon of note?
Well, tons. And I have to confess that I don't have the data at the top of my head here, but Jonathan Schooler and the University of Santa Barbara, and he's got a whole department. I'm going to say, I don't want to say metaconsciousness, but it has something to, so similar verbiage, I think, there, but you can look it up for sure and find all kinds
Yeah.
of interesting
Yeah.
information.
Well, I can well imagine that there's a great deal of creativity in there. And where does creativity come then? From a field of consciousness, perhaps?
Agreed.
And if daydreaming is anything, to me, it's kind of letting go of my grasp of this moment, and it's letting go, and something else is taking over.
It's that
So
notion of reframing in a way again.
yeah, reframing again. Okay. So we have the traits of thinking, purpose, suspending capacity to suspend certainty, which is particularly important now, don't we? Isn't it? In this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world that we are moving into or already in. And regenerative sustainability, I love that one as well, which is, do you want to just say briefly about that one, Shawne, before we move on to the next category?
It falls under that whole category of serves the whole. If we don't take care of the planet, it serves the whole, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. And then traits of expression. This being following from being and thinking, and our expression is therefore, um, these are traits which come out in how we show up in the world.
Well, I would say that as a leader, if my employee, my child, feels safe for full expression. Now, of course, hopefully that they've got a handle on their emotional balance and so forth. But it's important to have a safe place for diversity of thought, right? And so that's what I'm thinking in terms of expression, where if I'm working in a certain organization, and my leader feels that this is a safe place for Shawne to be, which often would happen, be a little bit, disruptive, disruptor, or muddy the waters or thinking out of the box and not following the line of what everybody else, what am I saying? It's a safe place for critical
Yeah.
thinking and thinking out of the box to be able to be self-expressed.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of wraps in creativity, inspiration, vision, resilience, which in a way are also related to doing. I mean, we talk about these categories, but they're sort of loose categories, a way of grouping the traits that you've articulated in the book. And then there are the traits of doing, which are kind of very much what we see as evidence of ourselves and other.
Well, it's so obvious that a few years ago, and even today, the notion of integrity, honesty, moral ethics, authenticity would be in a leader, obvious. We're not seeing that anymore. What has happened?
But we're not seeing it in notable places.
Well said. Well said. In notable places.
In notable places, it's sadly lacking.
It's
But as
shocking. It's
I
just
must do a shout
shocking
out.
to me. How
Sorry, say that again.
we can't trust some of the notable leaders right now.
Right.
And it filters into so many areas. We don't trust the media. We don't trust where we get our news from. Maybe more on the community level and maybe more in nonprofit level, we're seeing, obviously integrity and honesty and trust and authenticity and moral values. But gosh, we need leadership, that those values are just intrinsic in their being and doing.
Yeah. And a shout out here for lots of people. Okay. And I will say that when I first started Metaconscious Leaders, there was within me some kind of campaigning voice, which I wasn't content with because I don't want to be a campaigner. But when I came to, when I came to looking for people to talk to, looking for guests, I was really bowled over blown away by the number of really great people doing great things and leading with integrity and being examples of inspiration, being really inspiring examples of how we can be in this world, operating at a higher level, operating for the common good, or just operating with joy in a constructive way as opposed to a harmful way.
Mhm. Mhm.
So a lot of good stuff is going on, and yeah, one can say there's a view of the world which is that everything's in balance. Everything's in perfect balance. And there seems to be a concentration of one particular energy in notable places. But that's not to say that there isn't a lot of really good energy bubbling along underneath. And I think that's where the future is. And seeing that fills me with a great deal of optimism, real optimism, especially when one combines that with the recognition of the powerful force. I forget what the articulation was. The powerful force um, at work throughout the cosmos. The invisible hand. We aren't in control of everything. We are. Someone I have enormous amount of respect for says we are just monkeys walking around on a rock, flying through space. So yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about the traits of doing?
Oh gosh, I know we're closing here and we probably could go on for another hour or so, but
Yeah.
no, I agree with you. One of the things I noticed too is that and I don't want to say it's entirely in the background anymore, that we're seeing greater and greater and greater coming together and emerging wisdoms, people coming out and being more expressed about the nature of reality, what's right, what's in
Yeah.
integrity, the notion of spirituality in how people lead their lives. It used to be
Yeah.
like that was a no word. Well, whether it's the celebrities or it's business people or it's just regular folks speak. So I see that too. And
Yeah.
I'll often come to, event or a gathering or a dinner party, and I'm the one voice like, wait a minute, there's a whole lot of, this and this and this and this and that going on as well. It's just that you folks aren't noticing, or you're not open, that's not coming into your energy field or something along those lines. But I think
I think that to a large extent also, Shawne, we live a double life. So privately, we believe all sorts of things. We have a faith of all sorts of things. Publicly, or with strangers, or particularly in business, we don't go there. It's not on the agenda, and we consider it off limits. So we have a kind of double life. And my thought is that we need actually to make this part of the normal discourse when we're talking about anything, because it is what is fundamental. And quite frankly, where we are at the moment on the planet Earth, we need to be looking at what's fundamental and acting from that with true purpose, rather than in the crazy mindset that we're at the moment, where we really have got things very wrong, I believe, in terms of our philosophy, in terms of our understanding of what is fundamental and what reality is in the world.
Well, thank you for saying that. However, I crossed that bridge, I feel, a while back, that I don't have a double life and that I show up how you and I are having a conversation right now. Do
Yeah.
I interrupt people at a party because I can hear them going into crazy town conversation? No. However, when the timing's right and there's an appropriate segue, I speak up and I have a different way of seeing things, or I kind of feel like reframing what you are sharing there, but I don't have a double life. This is what you get here is what it is. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm proselytizing, because I can be much of an introvert in a way and observing, but it shows up in little ways, whether you're checkout line at the grocery, or, take your car in for service and you're chatting with the person there. I really try to engage, and it's not uncommon to lead into some kind of deeper spiritual, connective kind of conversation and relationship.
I would concur with you, Shawne, on that one. But when I said we, I wasn't meaning to draw you into that category. And because you don't lead that double life, that's why you're such a valued
Well,
guest on Metaconscious Leaders.
we try.
Exactly. Yeah, we try. So once again, Shawne, you've been the most generous and graceful guest on the podcast. Thank you very much. Do you have any closing comments, closing thoughts, and where can people get in touch with you and to discover about your work?
Well, firstly, I want to thank you for becoming such a nice friend and for continuing to ask me to participate on these podcasts with you. As I've always said, these conversations are joyous for me, and hope important and informative to your audience. And in terms of reaching me, it's Shawne at ShawneMitchell.com. And that's kind of easy to remember, I guess. Shawne with an E, SHAWNE. And thank you. And, buy the book, and lots of questions. I hope to kind of redo the book a little bit. I'd like to kind of hone in, now that it's been a couple years and things have changed, into some just maybe a shorter version, and just stick with some deeper fundamentals. But bottom line,
Well,
thank you.
a good part of it, Shawne, a good part of it is pretty timeless. So I wouldn't, if any of the listeners haven't yet bought it or read it, I would recommend you don't wait for the updates, because there's no need to.
God knows I may never get around to that anyway.
Yeah. Look, Shawne, I know you need to move and you have other commitments. So my great thanks to you. Until next time, have a wonderful and fulfilling life. And thank you. Be well.
Thank you too, Greg. Bless you.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want further information about Shawne and her book, then you'll find the links in the show notes below. Please also subscribe, follow, like us if you haven't already done so. This is very helpful in enabling us to reach a wider audience. Please share this link with others, and also leave a comment, as it's really useful to know what you're thinking as well. Until next week, thank you for listening and watching. Be well.